Here's David Smoak, Paul Catalina, and Craig Smoak.
All right, here we go, this 5 o'clock hour. I have watched Nicole Auerbach as she has covered many things college football. And by the way, she's a great follow right now because her Olympic knowledge is insane. I was watching her as Katie Ledecky was beaten, among other things as well. So that is a great follow if you haven't followed Nicole Auerbach for many things as well. Nicole, thanks for your time. It's like every other month there's something in college athletics and football that is just I don't want to say a bombshell. Last Wednesday was a bombshell. Have you ever seen such a stretch of anything college athletics as we've seen, really, even since COVID, the NIL, the Supreme Court, and now this?
No, because, I think it was already going to be a transformative year, and you could have said that it was one of the most impactful and important years in college sports history based on like NIL and the transfer rule change alone, throw in playoff expansion proposals and now major conference realignment. And, we're certainly past there. I mean, and like you said, coming off a COVID year with the financial crunch that everyone was under, everyone's media rights feels just a couple of years away, all these major conferences. It's wild. And you're absolutely right. It's like a week passes, you think you're in the clear for a normal preseason, and then, this bombshell drops.
All right, Nicole, I've asked everybody that's just kind of trying to gauge your opinion. What do you think the Big 12 should do? Stick together and try to fix things, or just call it what it is, old yeller this dude, and move on?
Well, I think you've got to try to stick together. I think you've got to try to do that and then add. Because otherwise, I don't think you want to give up. And I think right now the Big 12 has its autonomy status. It's a power conference. It doesn't lose that overnight just because Oklahoma and Texas leave. So there's weighted voting on NCAA issues. There's like actual tangible reasons to stay and try to preserve that because it gives you a standing within college sports and the ability to make certain decisions that not everybody has. Like the American Conference doesn't have that. But do I predict that the American tries to go on the offensive and so does the remainder of the Big 12 and everyone's kind of deciding like who's going after who and sometimes they're going to be an aggressor, sometimes they're going to be pursued. Like that's all probably going to happen. I think, you got to kick tires on other leagues and scheduling alliances, potentially things like that. You've got to do all of that. But, this is a very interesting time where, these leagues, the schools are going to either decide, when we say we're going to try to stick together, do we mean that or do we not? And are we going to look out for our own self-interest or are we going to try to keep this thing together and stay as a Power 5 conference? Like, that's a really big question to try to ask. And we've seen a lot of decisions in different eras of conference realignment really be about self-interest and not trying to preserve, the greater good of a conference or college sports balance as a whole. So, very curious to see how it goes, but I think you've got to, if you're the Big 12 or if you're certain members of the Big 12, you've got to try to keep everyone together and see what your options would be, collectively or at least like as a little block of schools.
So, Nicole, as I'm sure you have seen, the last few days have been speculation on, Oklahoma State to the Pac-12, Texas Tech here, Baylor here, TCU there, and none of us, really have an idea on anything right now, but a lot of potential landing spots. I see people, Oklahoma State's not an AAU school. How much do you think some of these other conferences, now having to probably be a bit reactionary to the SEC's moves, will have to or will look at maybe changing their mindset or their parameters to allow others into the fold? Or do you think they're going to be pretty adamant across the board about, no, this is how we do things and how we'll continue to do things?
Well, that's I think, the big question because, everyone's kind of, I've seen people saying, that AAU label for research university, like that doesn't matter. But the Big Ten has never added a school, like Nebraska was an AAU school when they got added and then they lost that standing. But like every other member of that league has that standard, and the presidents and universities, chancellors are the ones who vote on things like this. So that does matter. The ACC, when you think about like academic standing, there's things that matter. And when you're looking at conference realignment, there's going to be certain times where you're going to be more aggressive and you're going to be picky. And there's going to be other times where you're going to try to decide if you want to get into a certain market and, maybe it's not the perfect, build of the school, or the rankings aren't exactly where you want them to be. Or if someone decides that they're interested in Kansas and is really doing it based on, maybe the basketball program and hope that the football program will improve, like that's something that could absolutely happen. But I think it's too soon to know, because there are just so many people across college sports across the country, and, even within the Big 12, that were so taken by surprise, with this news last week, that it's really soon. And I think everyone in all of these other conferences is preaching some patience here and should try to evaluate this before immediately deciding, yes, we must add, or no, we must stay put. Like, I think people want to just take a breather and see what's out there, and not just add for adding sake, because otherwise you're just going to add bodies and you're not adding value to your media rights deal.
I saw two quotes, and I don't know if these are from you. I think one of them is, because you're talking about conversations you had, but these are two that kind of go back to something you said earlier in that answer. The sentiment came up a bunch in conversations I had with administrators throughout college sports this weekend. As one put it, no one is thinking about what's best for college athletics anymore. And I think there was another one that said, no amount of money will ever be enough. So what's the end game here, or do we have any clue?
Well, I think we're still waiting to see, right? Is the end game for the SEC that they want to get to 16, and it's because Texas and Oklahoma were available to them, and that's why they are going this route? Or are they thinking about going larger than 16? Do they want to become a mini NFL, right? Like, we don't know exactly what their end game is at this point, because I think that will also inform the way that other power conferences respond to this or don't respond in terms of adding members and who they target. So I think we still need to see that, but I do think, the sentiment about, this not being the best for college football or for college sports is something that a lot of people have said, because, concentrating even more power and resources and talent in the Southeast Conference is not helpful. I mean, it's part of the reason that people were clamoring for playoff expansion was they're getting tired of the same couple of teams dominating the sport and sucking all the oxygen out of the room. And now you're just going to be in that situation even more. I think the healthiest outcome for the sport, or the healthiest sport has been, is when there is balance throughout the country in different regions. And, when some of the traditional blue bloods have been strong in their respective parts of the country. And so, consolidating all that power is not really what's great for college sports. And in general, I mean, I think anyone who's against conference realignment also shares that sentiment, because you lose rivalries, you lose traditions, you lose the ability when you kind of join conferences that are far away, you lose the ability to drive to road games and go to stuff, right? Or it becomes too expensive to do things like that. So there's a lot of reasons why I think people across the country are, those who got into college sports because they loved the traditions and the culture and the differences and the pageantry and all these different campuses. Like, you really do lose that when you go to conference realignment, and it's just about money.
Is anyone for sure screwed in this, Nicole?
Well, I think, Texas, by joining the SEC, is going to make it more difficult to have a successful season for themselves and to reach the playoff. I mean, they're making it more challenging for themselves in that sense. They also go from being, arguably the most influential voice in the room to being one of 16 in a different league. I think, too, if the Big 12 does disband or dissolve and the members do end up in other places or get picked off by their leagues, like, certainly the Big 12 is the biggest loser. I think a lot of people are anticipating that that's possible. And, does that help the Pac-12 standings by default, right? And, what does this mean for the other leagues? But I think if the Big 12 doesn't survive, certainly the schools that were in it, the ones who, may not get their top landing choice, those would be schools that we would have to assume, didn't come out of this better than they were, 2 weeks ago.
Nicole, any idea of what those inside the NCAA are thinking about this? And at this point, I mean, I think Greg Sankey, put the blast on them, back in media days, and now you see a move like this. I mean, I've read various articles that have kind of, referenced the dissolution of the NCAA, but do you think that's where we're heading at this point?
Well, people go either direction on that. I think, multiple people I talked to really made the point that this type of move probably doesn't happen, in a different era where the NCAA is stronger. But the NCAA is weekend. It's had dating back to COVID and its lack of leadership and decision-making power in any of that last summer, NIL, Supreme Court, all of these other issues. There's just not a strong centralized governing body right now. And we have seen conference commissioners, especially at the Power 5 level, become the most powerful people in the sport. And I think that, obviously that's happening now. Obviously Greg Sankey has been the most powerful of the group. And then having 3 very new commissioners in the last 2 years will also help that as well, because they were talking about potentially how's the Big Ten going to react, the ACC, the Pac-12. Well, those are all people who are new on the job trying to navigate this. So, it also is another reason why the SEC, is probably on the aggressive side of this too, because, Greg Sankey has the most experience in college sports compared to those 3 new commissioners that are going to have to handle this as well. But I think, so there's obviously the power vacuum with the NCAA, but for the people who do think, maybe the Power 5 will eventually split off, I don't know if this necessarily leads to that, because you could either end up with a couple of mega conferences. You could also end up with the with the SEC at 16 and everybody else kind of close to the normal size that they are. But if the SEC wants to go bigger and bigger and try to become its own almost division and kind of be in a mini NFL, maybe that does negate the need for an NCAA. So it's just too soon to tell because we just don't know what the end game is for the SEC right now.
Just had somebody ask me about this Texas and Oklahoma being added to the SEC strengthen the college football playoff expansion. I think that's part of why we're seeing this, don't you, Nicole? Because the SEC, not every year, but most of the time, they're champion and somebody else elite would get in. Now, they may get 4 in. And that means you can be a part of that conference without having to win it and maybe even be 3rd or 4th best and get in. So does this not strengthen the college football expansion as far as the championship?
Well, so it's a couple things. I don't know if Texas and Oklahoma make the jump if the thing is still at 4 for the foreseeable future, because it's the at-large spots and what you just said, the fact that you don't have to be perfect, you don't have to win your conference to have a chance to make the playoffs. But I also think this makes a lot more sense about why Greg Sankey and the SEC were supportive of the 12-team model, because Greg Sankey and Bob Bowlesby were on that working group. And so, I remember, and it's very interesting to look back now on Bowlesby's comments about, kind of lauding Greg Sankey for being willing to go to this 12-team model, even though the SEC had no problem accessing the playoff in the 4-team model. It was something they don't have to do. It's for the betterment of the sport, blah, blah, blah. But now you can see why that would be such a benefit to the SEC if they were going to add Oklahoma and Texas, and why Oklahoma and Texas going to the SEC in a 12-team playoff is much more appealing as well. So we still don't know when that's going to start. We also don't know when Oklahoma and Texas are going to officially leave the Big 12 either. But I think you're seeing that because it's the amount of at-large spots and the idea that if you're loading up your league and you're going to have Oklahoma is going to make the playoff every year and hopefully Texas turns things around and can get in that mix. The SEC is thinking, can we get half the field in the playoff? Can we get half of it being SEC teams? You can see the wheels turning in Greg Sankey's mind.
All right, let's go back in time a little bit. Anything that the Big 12 could have done to stop this, say, 4 or 5 years ago?
Well, I'm very curious looking back, and because Texas has been Texas for a little while now, and I think when you talk to people in the league, again, everyone's still trying to piece together the timeline of how long conversations have been happening with the SEC and things like that. But certainly the media rights negotiation a couple months ago was a turning point in this. Certainly, Texas is. There's just been a number of issues right over the years about, and obviously a lot of it stems from, maybe if Texas was winning the Big 12, things would be a little bit different. But just like the power dynamics in the room, obviously we know how the Longhorn Network was formed and some of the different tiers of media rights that were negotiated the last go around during conference realignment. So there's all these different factors that come into play. And so you never know really what pushes buttons. And I'm sure we'll get kind of a detailed outline of the whole timeline. So there might be those turning point moments. I do think that there's a sentiment within the league that I'd be curious to see is, could Bob Bowlesby have done anything sooner? Could he have taken this Did he know? Like, when did he find out that this was a possibility? And could he have done anything to stop it sooner than this last week? Right? I mean, having a meeting that Oklahoma and Texas don't come on certainly was a big signal, and that it was really far along. And I'd be very curious to know, and I think obviously people within the Big 12 would like to know, when Bob Bowlesby got a whiff of this, and at that point, was it too late, or is there anything he could have done? I'm sure he was thinking, just like other people throughout the league, was a 12-team playoff is great for the Big 12. It's great for stability across college sports because all of the Power 5 leagues now basically get guaranteed access every year, and they can get multiple teams when they have multiple teams. So maybe people didn't expect that this was going to come. I mean, I think there really is a feeling of being blindsided throughout the Big 12 and throughout college sports. I mean, so that's why I would be super curious to find out eventually, once Bob Bowlesby is, talking again, because he's been, underground dealing with this for the last 4 or 5 days. I'd be super curious the first time he got a whiff of this. And at that point, if it was too late already. Well,
when he was at Big 12 Media Days, and we were there as well, he said exactly what you mentioned, that the conference or the college football playoff expansion would be good for the Big 12 and strength. I think he's in a bombshell somewhere because he didn't want to get hit with another one. I think he truly has been crushed by this in a lot of ways, emotionally, and who knows if he knew any kind of inkling at all. All right, let's discuss the Olympic Games. I just happened to watch your Twitter feed as I was prepping for today's show and having you on. So Katie Ledecky was beaten. And I know a lot of people are, oh my God, you're not allowed to get, she was beaten, but did she not have one of her best times ever in the event she finished with the silver?
No, she did. And, this was one of the events in the 400 free that was last night that she was not favored to win. She's also not going to be favored to win the 200 meter freestyle either. And it's not the end of the world. Like, I think we do expect perfection a lot of times from our Olympians, especially the ones, that are the greatest ever do it. And, the greatest female swimmer ever, or the greatest female gymnast ever, right? Like, you sort of just expect them to always get gold medals. But we've even seen that with Simone Biles. Like, she hasn't been as perfect as we're used to seeing her either at these Olympics. And people get older. It's been 5 years since the last Olympics. But Katie Ledecky, it was a phenomenal race. And now she finally has a rival. And she leads for most of the race. She gets out touched at the end. And still has one of the best times ever swam in the 400. She still owns the world record in this event. They almost were at world record pace. So it was still a phenomenal race. I think she handled it really well. She's still going to win other gold medals in the distance events this week.
What do you think of the sham of a ban of Russia in this thing?
Well, it's honestly not too dissimilar to last time, where they're going to let them compete. They have a name. They're the Russian Olympic Committee, ROC, this go around. They're going to be able to wear the colors. Like, it ultimately looks very similar. And there's a lot of people, certainly a lot of Americans, that wish, the Olympic would come down harder on doping and cheating and really incentivize people not to do it. But that day is not here yet. And so, the only thing that'll be different is we just won't hear the national anthem, but it'll look pretty similar to having Russia competing as a country.
All right. Thank you very much, Nicole. Great stuff. Good luck waking up to whatever else is new, or even before you go to bed tonight, something new in college football. Great stuff. Appreciate your time with theathletic.com.
All right. Thanks for having me, guys.
Nicole Auerbach. It's NicoleAuerbach. I know that's up on the graphic at times as well. But she's a fantastic writer. And also started talking about like Caleb Dressel might be this year's version of, I'm not saying Michael Phelps, but he's the one that can rack up a bunch of gold medals this year.
So have you all been watching? Did y'all watch over the weekend and all
that? That race with Titmus and Ledecky was awesome. I mean, it was awesome. It was one of the most fun things I've ever watched in sports. I'll tell you that right now. When you're watching just these, I mean, it looked like two dolphins darting through the water. It was ridiculous how fast they were going.
That was a great race. I got to say, the no fans thing's a total buzzkill. I mean, after getting, it'd be one thing if we had never gone back to crowds, but like watching like a wrestling show now and seeing 15,000 people and watching, NBA playoffs and seeing tens of thousands of people to watch like an empty swim meet or whatever. And I know there's little peripheral people and whatnot, but yeah, it's very odd.
There's a lot of sports I need fans for because I don't watch them enough to know what's good because I'm not a skateboarding judge.
Oh, yeah.
So I'm watching skateboarding and going, it all looks the same to me. So I don't know why this person was better than that person. But okay, I'm with you, judges, whatever it is, because I can't hear people ooh and ah. I have no idea. I do think this. I think I could, if somebody wanted to start a handball league here in Waco, I'd be down for that. That sport looks fun to me.
Okay, the skateboarding thing.
Yeah.
I was watching. This guy is competing in an Olympic sport. He has 60 seconds to do as many tricks as possible. He's wearing cargo pants.
Yeah.
His phone falls out of his pocket. His giant phone that he has in his pocket while competing in the Olympics, and he stops to go pick it up. And I'm watching this.
Is that not today more than anything ever?
This should not be. If you can have your phone in your pocket and it falls out, and you're like,
in the Olympics,
I need to go pick that up. It should not be in the Olympics.
My phone came out of my pocket, Paul. I was on the phone with you, and it hit the sidewalk. It can never hit the grass or a lawn or maybe a bush. It always hits like the sidewalk or parking
not a great
lot.
advertisement for those cargo pants.
Yeah. I haven't really watched much of the Olympic Games. I missed all of the men's basketball. You woke me up with a text
Men's
about
basketball is terrible. They played with no heart. We'll see if Pop can get something out of them here in the next. I mean, they got to beat the Czech Republic and Iran, so you would think that they would. I will say this, which I thought was 3-on-3, but it's called 3x3. Women's 3x3 basketball is fun to watch, man. Like it's fast. It moves fast. I never thought it'd be this guy.
And that's why you're a women's basketball expert.
Yeah, I'm telling you, it's fun to watch.
Are you going to do a top 5, whatever you just said, here pretty soon?
I might. I mean, just to chase that small demographic.
Yesterday you said you shared a text. You said you watched 13 different sports. I
watched a ton. I watched a ton.
I just haven't.
My girlfriend Amanda loves the Olympics, so it's on in the house on a loop.
I just haven't.
I watched handball, which I told you before. I think is pretty fun. It's like soccer, but you don't use your feet, and the ball is smaller. And and no offense to anybody who plays handball, it looks like something that we could have all made up. Like just bored. You ever make up a game when you're a kid and you're bored and you have like, I've got a ball and there's this and there's 4 of us. Let's make this up. And that's what it looks like. Water polo is fun to watch. I think those people are remarkable athletes to be able to kind of
I've always liked synchronized swimming.
Well, look, water polo is pretty amazing because you have to swim and also wrestle the ball away from people. Yeah. So it's like a combo of swimming and wrestling and soccer all together.
See that a lot in during the various summer. What do you call it? Spring break.
Olympics.
Yeah.
Summer Olympics. Yeah. We just see that. No.
But no, it's
all right.
I've enjoyed it.
254-339-1122. Skateboarding should not be in the Olympic Games. That's from the YouTube from Noop Ed.
Yeah, I just wanted to pass along, and that's a good debate. I've definitely seen a little back and forth over social media on that and some other sports as well that are now Olympic sports. I just want to make mention for the Baylor fans out there because that's mostly who we would normally be talking to. But I just saw where Baylor basketball posted that it's Vet Week and Isaiah Austin's in town. They had a picture of him at the Farrell Center, and I assume with it being Vet Week, there's going to be a lot more of the former players making their way back to Waco. So I just thought I'd pass that along. Cool to see Isaiah Austin back on campus.
All right. When we come back, 5:24 is the time. Paul's top 5 will come up in 31 minutes.